Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us again at this Greater Manchester press briefing. I'm joined this afternoon by Baroness Beverly Hughes, and Bev will speak to you shortly. But as ever, I will give my overview to begin in terms of the latest position with regard to COVID in Greater Manchester. Taking you through it slowly so that everyone can get the figures. The position is as we stand today. Over the last week, there have been 168 new cases confirmed in Greater Manchester. I have to say that they're only from Pillar 1 testing, so likely to be higher if you were to include the Pillar 2 testing data, which we still haven't got yet. But that figure is significantly down on what it would have been a few weeks ago. So the trend continues of things moving in the right direction. Although, sadly, we still have to report 28 deaths. Again, a reduction from where it's been in recent times, but that's still obviously a lot of families who are grieving this week. And we, of course, send our sympathies to them all. In terms of hospital admissions and patients in hospital in Greater Manchester, we have 66 patients in intensive care, stable from where it was last week, where it was 67. A reduction in the number of patients in general hospital beds. It was 523 this time last week, and it is now 468. 468. So an improvement there. And another improvement in an area that is the one that I always say we need to watch carefully, and that's hospital admissions, daily hospital admissions. That had crept up in recent weeks. As you might remember, the figure this time last week was 29 daily admissions. The figure for today is 11, so a significant reduction there, which is encouraging. I suppose the summary is moving in the right direction again, but 168 cases higher when you add in Pillar 2 is still a high number of new infections, and of course, sadly, 28 deaths. These are still high numbers, and they need to come down further, of course. If you then add in the picture in care homes, again, improving, but possibly not as quickly as we would like. Overall, we can tell you today that 8 more care homes in Greater Manchester have reported an outbreak. Maybe a phrase that doesn't kind of properly describe things, because that could just be one case. This is a report that will be issued to Public Health England, so it could be one or a number of cases. But this time last week, the cumulative number of care homes in Greater Manchester that had reported an outbreak or a cluster was 375. That has now risen to 383. So obviously still seeing issues within our care homes. However, that said, the percentage of care homes today that are saying there is at least one resident with COVID-19, that figure stands at 20%. So 1 in 5 of our care homes reporting a current infection, down from 24% this time last week. So again, movement in the right direction. If I can move on then to discuss what comes next and where we go from here. Obviously, we're looking at the opening of non-essential retail on Monday, and that will obviously bring more people onto the transport system, more people back into our towns and particularly our city centre. We'd asked the government to be certain that that was right in the Northwest. We haven't had any change in their plans, so we are preparing now for Monday the 15th. And what we're doing today is launching the Safe GM campaign, because we want to approach reopening with safety at the heart of everything that we're doing, because we believe the confidence that we need to bring back comes from safety and being seen to do everything carefully and in the right way. So I just want to take you through a few of the specifics that underpin that Safe GM campaign, reopening safely. The first is we have now put in place a plan to increase frequency on Metrolink to 10-minute, a 10-minute interval, but with doubles on pretty much every service. So we're trying to create a timetable here where there is enough space for social distancing on our tram, because most services will be a double, and we will move to a 10-minute service on Metrolink with doubles from Monday the 22nd. That's the quickest we could do it because of the practicalities of bringing staff back to get the service back up to that level. But the service will improve to a 10-minute service from Monday the 22nd. What we will do on Monday, though, is have staff on hand at some of our Metrolink, our busier Metrolink stops, to hand out face masks, because obviously the government guidance has changed since last week, and we want that culture to be clearly established of safety first on Metrolink. It's obviously to get the travelling public in the habit of wearing a face mask or a face covering, which of course now is required. Alongside that, we'll be providing sanitizer at key bus stops, interchanges, and in time onto the Metrolink system as well. So we're wanting to ensure that there is easy access to sanitizer for people when they're out on the public transport system. Something that's coming on Monday is designed to give more flexibility to the travelling public, recognising that people may not be now coming in to work a normal working week as they would have done in the past. They may be coming in for a day and then not working and working from home on another day. So we're trying to respond to that call for greater flexibility. Those amongst you of a certain age might remember something called the Clipper card in Greater Manchester, going back to the 1980s, which was a ticket that people could purchase and then travel as and when, rather than being limited to a certain day or a week. So we are bringing through its successor called Clipper, which will be a flexible Metrolink ticket whereby people can buy a package of tickets but only use them as and when convenient to them without the time limit on travel. So that comes in from Monday and is intended to help people manage perhaps a more a working week, which might be mixing working from home with working in the city centre. Couple of other things just to mention. Of course, we've now submitted our bid to the government on emergency active travel funding. So a bid has gone in from Greater Manchester worth £21.5 million. This would cover some 200 kilometres of our road network and 94 kilometres on strategic routes. So a significant intervention, and we are working to ensure that we get this this right and joined up across the city region. And I know Manchester City Council are working with districts to make sure that as far as possible that we join up the routes that are being proposed. Although that is work that's ongoing, and further statements will be made in due course. The priority in the city centre is pedestrianisation, and we think it's very important to allow people the space to socially distance, and that's certainly the City Council's priority. So this isn't a finished article yet. Of course, we need to balance road space with other users. It's work in progress, but I think you can see from the statements issued by the City Council today that there is progress, and we will continue to facilitate discussions. It's for the districts to decide what they want to do, but we're working through our Cycling and Walking Commissioner Chris Boardman to get in place arrangements that will support people to use active travel, recognising that there is going to be limited capacity on our public transport system. the roads will be busy with cars, and we want to make active travel a real possibility for those who want to commute in that way. So if I'll just finish on a final point around other elements of the Safe GM campaign as it builds out. Of course, kind of fresh in people's minds is the R number for the North West, as published last Friday evening from Public Health England, which took the R number over 1. As I said at the weekend, important not to overreact to this, because of course there are other iterations of the R number. The London School of Tropical Medicine had it at 0.8 for the North West on Thursday, so it does vary. But of course, you can't ignore it when it does go over 1. And I know there's a requirement amongst the public for more information about the position with the spread of the virus in Greater Manchester, and actually it's a more localised level. I've been discussing today with leaders about that, and we're conscious that the R number in itself doesn't particularly help people understand what is going on in their community. So we've taken a decision in principle to work towards a localised presentation of data for Greater Manchester that's up to date, hopefully relevant to people, a heat map, if you like, for the Greater Manchester City region. Further work to be done to get it right, particularly the Pillar 2 data that needs to come into it to really make it a complete picture. But we've taken a decision in principle to move in that direction, and we think that also is an important element of our Safe GM campaign, empowering the public with more localised information so that they can make informed judgments, and actually re-emphasising the importance of the national public health messaging when they are using some of the new flexibilities, the new retail opportunities opening up from Monday. So as I say, all part of the Safe GM campaign, and I'm pleased that we're launching that today and getting off on the right foot as we look to reopening and welcoming people back to our towns and our city centre. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'm now going to hand over to the Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes, for her update. Bev.
Thank you, Andy. I'm just checking my microphone's on. Hello, everybody. I think in terms of the general picture in policing, there's very little to add to what I said last week, actually. Crime is steadily rising, still below pre-COVID levels. Numbers of serious and particularly violent crimes is also rising, but hasn't presented any particular issues for the police, but obviously it's something we're monitoring very carefully. The issue, I think, of the moment that you'll recognise is the Black Lives Matter campaign following the death of George Floyd in America, and the social movement really that has grown here as in other places to express the public's dissatisfaction at the situation for many black people, black and minority ethnic people in this country. So we saw the first marches last weekend all over the country. Here in Greater Manchester, there were 2 substantial protest marches, one on the Saturday, one on the Sunday. I think about 4,500 people on the Saturday and about 10,000 people on the Sunday. That was a very peaceful march. The discussions that always take place between the police and the organisers took place. The social distancing, messages were reinforced. The marches, the people who were marching behaved very responsibly. The police attended, and I think their presence was welcomed. There was no issues, there was no public order issues, there were no arrests in Greater Manchester. So compared to some other parts of the country, I think the whole event was facilitated here, and it was very, very well managed. I think that's led, hasn't it, to a wider discussion about what the role of the police should be in enabling those kind of marches at this time of a public health emergency. And I think we're quite clear that it's not the role of the police to ban those marches. Peaceful protest is an absolutely fundamental part of our democracy. And whilst we are in a very difficult situation, it's also clear that the risk of infection is much lower if you're outside. And if people really try, as they did here in Manchester, to respect the guidelines on keeping your distance from other people, then it is possible to conduct those kinds of events responsibly. We think there will be some more marches this weekend. The police are being notified about a number of events that people want to participate in across Greater Manchester, a lot of them very small events. We expect some marches on Saturday, but at the moment, nothing of the size and the order of that which we saw at the weekend. And I think, that's led to a wider debate about how is policing generally doing in relation to treating all people fairly, around how representative are the police services of all of the people in our communities, those issues of diversity and proportionality. And, I would like to say that those are really important issues, both for the Mayor and I, but also for the senior leaders in Greater Manchester Police. And we are continually striving to do better on both of those fronts. So in relation to diversity, over the last 3 years, we've seen the representation of black and minority ethnic people in Greater Manchester Police Service double from around 4% to just under 9%. And that hasn't just happened. It's been a deliberate pursuit of recruiting more people from black and minority ethnic groups. And, a lot of effort does go into that. It's not just about putting out the adverts in the right places. It actually involves a lot of investment in talking to young people and others in communities where black and minority ethnic people are living, talking to them about what it means to be a police officer and encouraging them to think of themselves as potentially joining the police service. So a lot of that work in schools and other community groups has to go on to support that drive. Similarly, around disproportionality and whether or not use of stop and search and other forceful methods that the police can use are being applied equally. And again, there's a huge focus on scrutinising what is happening in the police service. And as I think we said last week, the Mayor has committed to collate. We scrutinise all of those figures anyway, and they have always been, until recently, when we had the problem with IOPS, they've always been put on our GMP online website. They've always been available, but we're now going to collate them all together and actually develop that data so that it tells a richer story, really, and put it in one publication, which we're going to produce quarterly, so it's very, very transparent. And we hope that the first one of those will be ready by the end of the summer. So I think that's it for me, Andy. Well, just to say one more thing, I think, is that although the focus has been on the police, and that's completely understandable in terms of the context and asking all those questions, which are absolutely right, I would just say that, to some extent, a considerable extent, the situation in relation to police represents actually the wider social context here. So the huge inequalities that still exist in our society for many groups of people, of whom black and minority ethnic people are one. So if you look at any organisation, actually, if you look at any data set, you will tend to find that black and minority ethnic people, amongst other groups like disabled people, are not fairly representative. They don't get a fair crack of the whip, and they don't necessarily get the same resources and the same opportunities. And so I think we've got to see it in that wider context. And, for that reason as well, I really welcome the debate that's taking place around these issues at the moment. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much, Bev. And just to add a couple of quick bits from me before we open up to your questions. Obviously we have seen the strength of feeling over recent days with regard to what happened in the States, but also the feeling of communities here with regard to racial inequality that still exists. And you might recall that last week the leaders issued a statement to bring forward our plans for a race equality panel. We've met this morning, we've agreed the arrangements for that panel, but we've now agreed, so there's no delay, to set up a listening exercise asking members of the community to start to develop the proposals and put the arrangements in place to develop that panel. So that will start pretty much straight away. Dialogue with all communities, leading to the establishment of the Greater Manchester Race Equality Panel. So we'll be saying more about that in the coming days, but we've moved very quickly because obviously we believe it's about action in this moment, and that action, hopefully they can see how serious we are in moving forward. Separate to that, there is a particular case that has attracted a lot of public concern over recent days, and it's the case of Shukri Abdi, who sadly drowned in Bury in June 2019, and there's been a lot of people getting in touch with myself and the Deputy Mayor, emails sent to us, but a petition signed, a concern around understanding what happened, the truth about the case, and people have been calling for an independent inquiry. You should have a statement that I'm issuing this afternoon. It should have been given to you, may be about to be given to you, or you may have it already. What this says is how grateful we are for the expression of concern from so many people, and we're sure that will be appreciated by Shukri's family. People were calling for an independent inquiry. Well, what I've made clear in the statement is there is obviously an independent inquiry ongoing in the form of an inquest led by a coroner. And if I were to set up anything at this point in time, it would obviously jeopardise those legal proceedings and could prevent us establishing what happened. And obviously that's not something that I'm prepared to risk. That said, myself and the Deputy Mayor have today written to the coroner to express our full support in helping her bring about the conclusion of the inquest as soon as possible, and also our support for the fullest possible inquiry, both in terms of events on the day and events leading up to what happened on the day, looking into the role of different public bodies in Greater Manchester. So we've sent that letter today. There, of course, has been unfortunately a pause to the inquest proceedings because of the pandemic, but we are obviously expressing our support to the coroner to help restart that as quickly as possible, and when is appropriate and safe to do so, of course. But then more broadly, committing to support that inquiry in any way that we can, and committing to taking further action with regard to anything that may come from it, if that is necessary. So I hope that's helpful, given the concern that there's been around that very tragic case in recent days, and you have a statement there which sets out our position on it. So thank you, Bev. Jimmy, I think we're handing over to you today, not Ross, to steer us through the questions.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Bev. So in the questions on the right-hand side, and thank you to everybody for submitting your questions. We have a question from Siobhan McGee from Roch Valley Radio, and a connected one from Nigel Barlow at About Manchester. These are at 209 and 210. Siobhan asks, in Prime Minister's questions early today, Labour MP Vicky Foxcroft expressed her concerns over those shielding and their ability to exercise outside. Do you agree that those in this situation should have a designated hour to go outside to protect them from COVID? And Nigel, more broadly, Andy asks, there's been a lot of talk about relaxing the 2-metre rule and its influence on the viability of businesses and education. Is it time to start protecting jobs as well as public health?
Well, thanks both for your questions. On the first question, I certainly recognise the concern about the mental health, I guess, of people who are shielding, and the need to help them get outside and get the benefits of exercise. Of course, this has to be in line with the government guidance, but I think the principle of, in the same way that we supported priority access to supermarkets, priority access to open space for those shielding is an idea that's certainly worth looking at. just so that we give people in that position confidence to go outside and not be overfaced perhaps by crowds. So it's an idea I'd certainly be prepared to look at and discuss with our 10 councils, but we would await a government steer on that particular issue. On the 2 metre rule, I mean, obviously there are different approaches being taken around the world, and certainly when it comes to a public transport capacity consideration, of course, the reduction of the 2 metre requirement would increase the number of people that we could fit on buses and trams. Of course, it is linked, I think, to the wearing of face masks, and the evidence would have to be looked at, I guess, in terms of can the universal wearing of face masks create more confidence to reduce 2 metre distancing. But I think the government is right to proceed cautiously on this point, and I would probably be more on the side of the government, if you like, than I would on those necessarily calling for a quick change. I think this is one absolutely to proceed with caution. You know, we're only just beginning to reopen things. As I've said to you this afternoon, Nigel, it's about a safe Greater Manchester, you know, rebuilding confidence step by step, not going too far too soon. And I think, you know, to abandon the 2 metre distancing, which people have now got used to by and large and are respecting, I think it would probably be a step too far to abandon that at this point, but keep it under review, I think, as the government said yesterday.
Thank you, Andy. So questions a little lower down on your Q&A. One is from Niall Griffiths at the MEN and a connected one from Helen Pidd at the Guardian. Niall asks, Manchester Council has come under fire for not working with neighbouring boroughs to provide pop-up cycle routes into the city centre. The cabinet member at another council said the approach undermined the combined authority, while an MP said it endangered lives. What is your reaction? Helen's connected question is, are you frustrated with Manchester City Council's refusal to build pop-up bike lanes, meaning temporary cycle lanes planned by the other 9 boroughs stop abruptly at the Manchester border? Helen also adds that there are 45% of Mancunians with no car. How are they expected to get into town safely if they don't use public transport?
Well, thanks both for your questions. What I would say is that it's an issue of working at speed here. You know, that this is something that all 10 of our districts are looking at very, very seriously. And they're having to work at great speed, given the timetables the government have put down, but also the opportunity that we have before all of the road traffic arrives back, how we might create space, not just for cyclists, for pedestrians too. And I think this is the challenge that the city centre, the city council has, because obviously you have the footfall and the pedestrians in the city centre, and it's about creating space for them so that they can socially distance, as well as then accommodating other potential road users, including cyclists. But I think there has been a statement today from Manchester City Council about working with districts to get, where possible, the connection between the routes coming into the city and then, of course, space within the boundaries of the city. So what I'd say, Helen, is it's work in progress. From my point of view, we're the facilitator. Obviously, we're there to support those discussions, facilitate the arrangements between the different councils. I don't think we're at the finished article here, because the bid that went in on Friday was very much the first big expression of interest. There's more to be done here to refine the scheme as we go along. So, you know, I think I very much welcome what the City Council have said today. I think, you know, give us time here to get this as good as we can make it. But I think everyone wants the same thing, which is to give, you know, for people who can't find a route onto public transport, as you say, and who don't own a car, give them an alternative way into the city. And that's what we're all hoping to achieve.
Thank you, Andy. So a little further down on the right-hand side, in fact at the top, is Joseph Timon from the Bolton News and Bury Times. Apologies if it's Timon, Joseph. Andy, will you commission a review of statues with links to slavery across Greater Manchester, like the Mayor of London has? And where do you personally stand on removing Sir Robert Peel's statue in Bury? And there's a connected question, Kevin Fitzpatrick from Radio Manchester at 2:29. What is your position on statues and historical monuments being reassessed according to modern values? And I suppose Bev may also have a view on this.
Well, thank you. Thanks both, Joseph, Kevin. we've had a discussion this morning about this, myself and the 10 leaders, and I think we all agree that it would help to have a GM set of principles to deal with these issues, and they haven't been agreed yet. So we're now going to take away and develop some of those principles. I think the general feeling was where people want things to be reconsidered in the kind of light of where we are now, then we need a process by which that can happen. I think what we're all a little cautious about is the idea that we just simply move quickly and we kind of tear things down, and I don't think we feel that's the right way to do it. What instead there has to be is a process whereby on a case-by-case basis the arguments can be made and a decision can be reached. So we're going to bring forward some GM principles for how those issues are going to be dealt with, recognising that there'll be different views within the community, but at the same time hearing a need to kind of respect the fact that where individuals have links to the slave trade, that obviously is something that people wouldn't and can't support in this day and age. So I think no one's saying that we're setting a process to start taking down statues. It's simply a process whereby the issues can be considered. On Sir Robert Peel, I think there's a feeling that there's a misunderstanding perhaps here, which is that his father had links to the slave trade rather than Peel himself, or the Peel who's commemorated in different places in Greater Manchester. And it's not necessarily the case that we can keep taking this further and further and kind of revisit everybody in that way, particularly in light of their own ancestors. But again, there will be concerns, and I think what we're saying is let's look at it, but look at it in a considered and careful way. And that's what the process we're setting up is intended to achieve, recognising the strength of feeling that we saw at the weekend. But I'll pass over to Bev if she wants to add anything extra to that. Oh, on mute, Bev.
Thanks, Andy. Only that I think it's a healthy debate. I think, whilst I hear what you're saying, Andy, don't want to go on a process of totally revisioning the whole of our history, particularly, and removing everything. But I think to ask the question is, who are the kind of people that we should be celebrating? And so I think where residents question whether a statue of a particular person is now consistent with the values we'd want to express today, and if not, what do we do about that? But also to say, who aren't we commemorating that we should be commemorating? I think Manchester's got a good more recent history here of asking the public that kind of question, and we've now got the statue of Emmeline Pankhurst and Alan Turing and commemoration of the Peterloo massacre, and that's great. I think it took far too long to get the suffragettes commemorated, but I think once you start asking people those questions, who are the people we'd want to celebrate? What are the values of our place here, and how do we want to acknowledge the people who've helped to shape in a positive way Greater Manchester? And I think that's all to the good.
Thank you both. And Andy. A second question from Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester, which ties into something that's also being asked by Adam Clark at Roch Valley Radio. Kevin asks, Greater Manchester's championed its own efforts to support early years education. How concerned, Andy, are you about this age group, particularly with many primary schools not returning or many children not attending when they can? And Adam Clark at Roch Valley Radio asks a related question, which is yesterday the government, according to Adam, backtracked on their plans for primary schools to fully return before the summer break. Do you think the government have fallen to pressure from the public on these matters?
I think you've probably got to the right the right place. I hadn't particularly been calling for no action before September. What we've been calling for was flexibility, and I think the government would have been better served if they'd allowed that flexibility from the beginning, and I think the failure to do that created quite a difficult situation and piled pressure on head teachers that they found it difficult to deal with. So I think, given where we've got to, I think it probably was a sensible decision. But that then raises the issue about how we help children who will be particularly disadvantaged by it. And that was something that we discussed with the leaders this morning. So what more can we do, particularly over the summer, to help with catch-up support, or is there more we can do to help schools open over the summer and provide a place for kids to go, particularly if we can provide food, because we were disappointed with the decision from the government not to provide free school meals vouchers for kids over the summer. And I very much, as Mayor, want to launch a No Child Goes Hungry campaign in Greater Manchester this summer, and I would be seeing if we could work through schools prepared to stay open to do that. So I think what we all recognise is there is a job of work to be done now that the government's taken its decision with regard to how can we support children and schools over the coming months, so that we get a range of support in place, and children used to going back to school perhaps before the summer ends, so that when we get to September, we can start in a more orderly way at that point. So a commitment to do more work in this whole area, recognising it is a big issue and it's become quite messy. And as I say, it probably would have been helped if we didn't have the inflexible approach from the start. But we are where we are. We'll be working very hard now to support children in schools and put in place whatever initiatives we can over the summer, particularly to help kids who might have been most disadvantaged by the time out of school.
Could I just come in on that, Andy, please?
Absolutely, Bev.
Yeah, I think to answer your question directly about early years, Kevin, whilst there's other groups of children, and particularly disadvantaged children, about whom we'd be most concerned, this is a very great concern, because we know that the impact of losing out on education opportunity in those early years is much more likely to carry through very long term. We know that disadvantaged children, particularly, even who are in school full time, have a lot to make up, and often don't make up their potential by the time they get into secondary school, and that's critical. On the broader question, I do feel strongly in support of those who are saying now we've needed a much stronger national leadership in terms of a strategy around education. Even those schools, I'm a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and in the school I'm working with, it's very typical, but because of the constraints, even those children who are going into school now are going into school 4 days a week, 1 week in, 1 week off. So actually the number of days of education that they will have between now and the end of this term is really very, very small in the scheme of things. And I think we need a much more ambitious strategy around how we try and give children across all ages the maximum that we can between now and September, and then building on from September. Is that about looking at other buildings so that we can take more children in? Having a much more ambitious approach to this. Thanks.
Thank you, Bev and Andy. This is one for Bev. This is at the bottom, Bev, at 248. This is a question from Joseph at the Bolton News. I know you mentioned at the beginning, Bev, your views on the Black Lives Matter marches from the weekend, but Joseph asks, with the R number above 1, at least by one measure, in the northwest, should mass gatherings in Greater Manchester, such as the Black Lives Matter protests in Prestwich this afternoon and in Bolton on this coming Saturday, be discouraged, especially given the disproportionate COVID death rate in the BAME population? And that's a question for Beth.
Yeah, thanks. I think, there's a number of different competing imperatives here, Joseph, aren't there? As I said earlier in my introductory remarks, it is an important principle of our democratic life here that when people feel strongly, they should be able to make those feelings known if they choose with a gathering or a march. And yet we're in a situation in which mass gatherings, particularly if people are very close together, present a health risk. So I think that what the police have to do, and what they have been doing, is face that dilemma in a proportionate way to facilitate where they can those kinds of gatherings, but in the context of the kind of discussions that take place before those events, and also with the organisers during the events, that they're conducted in such a way as to absolutely minimise those health risks. And I said that was achieved this weekend in a very, very positive way. In fact, as well as the liaison officers that we have out at the time when the event's taking place, we also had a number of community observers that we appointed to look at what was happening and give us feedback on that. And their feedback about the way that event last Saturday was conducted was very, very positive indeed. And I have no doubt that we can repeat and achieve that same standard in the events that are coming forward this weekend, and as you say, in Press Switch today.
Thank you, Bev. Andy, some questions about Sunday's press conference with Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of the Liverpool City region. Hannah Miller from ITV Granada at 2:40 asks that on Sunday you urged people not to take advantage of the full freedoms available to them. Is that still your message? And connected questions from Adam Clark at Roch Valley Radio, who asks that you sent a letter to the Prime Minister on Sunday. Have you received a reply yet? Joseph at Bolton at 2:40 also asks that you said you didn't want to go down the route of local lockdowns on Sunday. Instead, you'd rather work with communities to empower them. With the R rate above 1 in the northwest, how will authorities be engaging with residents in Greater Manchester?
Thank you. I'll just add something to what Bev just said, Jimmy, because I discourage people from attending on Friday before what happened on Saturday. But, I'm a white man in my 50s, and I don't know how it feels to be somebody growing up who's black in Moss Side or a different community in Greater Manchester, or somebody who's growing up in Oldham or Rochdale from a Bangladeshi community. Obviously, they will feel and do feel very, very passionate about what's been going on. So, I think you have to recognise that we've got two things going on here, both of which kind of, as Bev said, a clash of things that that both are critically important to people, and we're dealing with it as best we can. Obviously, in an ideal world, we would not want people to gather, but I think in the way things happened, it was probably done as well as we could have hoped, and we're grateful to the way people conducted themselves, and indeed the way the police managed things as well. And I just think it's important to recognise it in that way. In terms of the questions, Hannah, on your question, I think I said, if people are using the freedoms, they should do so very carefully, and that definitely remains my position. I did say on Sunday that I don't believe people should use the freedom to travel. I don't think that's fair to people in the Lake District or Formby or Blackpool. That is a freedom I really would ask people not to use, because I think it's placing a very big burden on some of those communities. But this is the point about our localised data that we're seeking to publish, because when people see it, and obviously if they can see where there is a greater concentration of cases, I would suggest in those places perhaps people shouldn't gather in groups of 6. And that's what this map is intended to do, to sort of help people understand how far they should go in using the freedoms. That's the whole point of it, actually. And I think it could really help people make sense of things. It could be a guide to churches or to businesses, whether to open early or not, or if they do open, what measures they should put in place. I think we're entering a bit of a new phase of this whole thing now, where we've got to help people navigate the opening of the wider world, and that's what our localized map is intended to achieve, and hopefully that makes sense. I'm not aware that we've had a reply yet, Jimmy, to the letter that we sent to the Prime Minister, although there was a debate about it in Parliament on Monday, and we welcomed the Shadow Health Secretary bringing that debate, and echoing some of the calls that we made. Obviously, the change on schools was partly in line with what we've been calling for, that greater flexibility. And on the localised map, I mean, we're trying to get this right so that we do give people meaningful data, so that local authorities can manage things in a way that's right for every community. And we would like the data not to be necessarily at borough level, but a bit lower than that, so it's very meaningful for the place where they live. But it's work in progress, but we are keen to bring it back as quickly as possible. The point is, of course, the R number on its own doesn't necessarily give people the full picture, because the R number can be above 1 on a very small number of cases. The R number just relates to how much one individual is passing on to others. So, you know, the R number is one thing, but we think it needs to be supplemented by a much fuller picture, particularly at local level, and that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Andy. Last few questions now. We've 2 on health matters. Perhaps the first one is Michael Gaffney from Heart and Smooth, Andy, which is at 2:55. Michael asks that today at PMQs, the Prime Minister said, with reference to test and trace, we are now able to identify hotspots and to step on outbreaks when they occur. Is this actually the case in Greater Manchester, as far as you're aware? And what progress has been made with the Greater Manchester enhanced test and trace system?
Well, certainly progress is being made, but I have to be honest, it's not my understanding that we're at that level of sophistication yet. I think it'll be some weeks before we are at that point. I think there's been good progress, but I don't believe that the test and trace system is that responsive, and you know, it will require further work before it will be at that level. And I want to reiterate something I said on Sunday. For me, the thing will only work is when people get a message from the system, they know that they can self-isolate because they're supported to do so by their employer, or indeed they're paid to do so. And I still think there's a very big problem here. The government hasn't shown how people who might not be paid if they need to self-isolate can get support, particularly who aren't paid enough to qualify for statutory sick pay. And I think these are the kind of things that need to be resolved if the system is to work as well as the Prime Minister claims.
Thank you, Andy. And the other health question is from Claire Fallon. It's Channel 4 News on care homes. Is enough help or cash getting through to care homes? We've been told about issues with the £600 million infection control fund and narrow limits on what it can be spent on. Many care homes say they can't spend the money within the rules or the limitations.
Well, Claire, at the start of this briefing, I gave figures for care homes, and the system we put in place here is of a higher standard than other parts of the country in terms of the monitoring that we're doing across all of our care homes. And when you ask about help, we've been running a mutual aid system throughout this crisis, whereby hospitals and other parts of the system have been working with our care homes, identifying some of those issues that we have done through the systems that we're working. With regard to the funding, it hasn't been put to me that they can't spend funding on what they need to. I'll happily take that issue away and discuss it with colleagues in our health partnership. But we've been working very hard. Some of our approach has been a very specific GM approach because of the freedoms we have through devolution. We've tried to operate as one system. We've tried to put in place the support for care homes as much as we can. We have a dashboard for PPE within care homes, and the position now is a strong position. We are making sure those supplies are coming through. So I'm confident that we are supporting our care homes properly, and I'm not aware that they are reporting to us that there are things they need to be spending money on that they're prevented by doing so. But I promise that I can take that issue away and come back to you.
Thank you, Andy. Then the final 2 questions before any final remarks that you'd like to make, or Bev. One is on private investment in development and one is on public spaces. So Dan from Place Northwest at 3 o'clock asks that private funding for development has slowed in the pandemic. Could this be an opportunity for councils to enter into more partnerships with private sector developers to boost regeneration of town centres? Do you know, Andy, what plans in terms of funding for development the CA might be working on at the moment? And Ian Hills at Wythenshawe FM asks if you have heard anything about the possible reopening of public libraries.
On the latter, I haven't, Jimmy, but as you know, we aren't necessarily consulted or forewarned about changes in government policy on these things. But no, I haven't been told anything about that. On the question of councils striking more commercial deals, well, actually, the mood music is the opposite in central government. They're being quite negative about the whole question of investments made by local authorities. And we feel this is very unfair because of the way local government funding has gone in recent times. Local authorities have been encouraged almost to become more entrepreneurial with some of their investments. But what we're hearing now is that the government won't pick up some of those costs when it comes to the position of local, or the lost income, I might say, when it comes to restoring the position of local government finance coming out of this. So in some ways, councils are being punished for having made some of those investments over recent years. So we're working with the other mayors and local authorities around the country and making an argument to the government to say you can't, in all conscience, punish councils who've made entrepreneurial investments over the years to try and boost local income, and that's a call that we'll be putting to the government very strongly in the coming days.
Thank you, Andy. So, any final remarks from yourself or Bev?
Bev, would you like to go first? You're on mute, Bev.
Just to say what I think you said before, and probably will say again, Andy, it's really helpful to have these conferences. I think appreciate the questions, and it helps us to get messages out, but also the scrutiny that you're bringing to what we're trying to do across the piece here in Greater Manchester for our citizens. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bev, and thanks everybody for tuning in. What I would just say in conclusion is we are entering a new phase of this as more of the world starts to reawaken, and our aim in this is to give people confidence, to prioritise safety at all times, and that's the thrust of what you've been hearing from me and Bev today. We are going to move down this route of more localised data, and I think that will really help people understand how things are on the ground. Sometimes people can see this situation as though it's a blanket that affects all areas equally, and it isn't. I think we need to help people understand the differences and what they can do to make well-informed judgments, and we're certainly going to be working on that in the coming days. So we'll update you on that when the time comes. Just to say a little more about the weekend and our decision today to begin immediately this listening exercise with the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community in Greater Manchester. I think we are living through a moment where real change is coming. We haven't seen the progress that we needed to see over recent years. It's still the case that young people growing up in those communities can face much bigger challenges in terms of getting on in life. They can face discrimination that others don't. On the question of statues, I have to say, we're quite proud in many ways in that we don't necessarily have the same statues here that other places have. We have a proud tradition in many ways of standing up against discrimination. If you think back to Manchester in the 1860s, the working men of Manchester made a very big statement that Black Lives Matter when they refused to handle slave-picked cotton. And, it runs deep here, that anti-discrimination, anti-racism sentiment. And as far as we're concerned, we very much owe it to those people to continue to speak out on these issues. And as Bev said before, if there's a case to look at a part of our history that needs to be thought about again, then to show our communities that we're always prepared to do that. But let's not think only in terms of symbols. We need to think in terms of real action to support people in this time to overcome some of the discrimination that they face and some of the inequalities. We do need to respond to the Public Health England report, which has recognised that some of our minority ethnic communities have been very hard hit by this virus, but also we need to think about how we help young people through this time. And I can confirm that the leaders have just given in principle support to developing a young person's guarantee in Greater Manchester. This is about giving every young person growing up here a guaranteed offer of support so that they don't lose their way in a time when they may be really struggling. And we're going to be publishing more details about that in the coming days, alongside establishing a young person's task force so that we can particularly support those young people who might face the greatest challenges in this moment. So we've made a big commitment really to respond properly to what's being said by the Black Lives Matter movement. We're not going down the path of any knee-jerk responses, but obviously we will have a process whereby concerns about monuments can be considered carefully. But that's probably it for today, Jimmy. Thanks again, everybody, for your questions, for your support in getting the message out to the public. We're very grateful that you come along to these events every week, and we'll see you again next Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.